In the same week that Donald Trump appeared before cameras and accused India of taking advantage of America, something far more important was happening quietly in the waters near the Andaman Islands. 15 kilometers off India's coast, an Indian drilling rig broke through a geological formation nearly 2,000 meters beneath the ocean floor and discovered natural gas. Soon after, India's Energy Minister Hardeep Singh Puri posted a video of flames rising from the well and described it as an ocean of energy opportunities. That image matters because it captures the contrast of India's moment. On one side, the President of the United States was trying to pressure India through tariffs, rhetoric, and public negotiation. On the other side, India was doing what serious nations do when they are thinking beyond the next news cycle. It was building alternatives, reducing dependence, and creating options before the crisis arrived. That is the real story of India in 2026. Trump is trying to pressure India. Turkey is asking India not to punish it for standing with Pakistan. Pakistan is struggling from within. China is watching India build weapons, routes, supply chains, and energy security. And through all of this, India is not responding emotionally. It is not rushing into noise. It is not begging for approval. It is preparing, building, and becoming harder to stop. The new India has understood one principle very clearly. Every dependency is a vulnerability, and every vulnerability must be turned into a project. India is building options before the world understands why those options matter. And now, in an unstable world, those options are becoming power. To understand why Trump is being aggressive toward India right now, we need to understand both the immediate trigger and the larger pattern in how he negotiates. The immediate trigger is straightforward. According to the United States Ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, the India-US bilateral trade deal is almost complete. He described it as 99% done, with only technical hurdles remaining. In Trump's negotiating style, this is exactly the moment when pressure rises. He often negotiates loudly, attacks publicly, creates headlines, and then tries to extract final concessions while the other side is already invested in closing the deal. This is not new. Trump has used this method with China, with Iran, with allies, and now with India. A large American trade negotiating team spent several days in India in early June, working through the final details of the agreement. Almost immediately after those discussions, Trump publicly claimed that India had taken advantage of America. But India did not panic. It did not overreact. It did not give him the emotional response he wanted, because India understands the difference between noise and negotiation. When U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited India, he made a major statement. He said India had committed to buying $500 billion worth of American goods over 5 years, including energy, technology, agriculture, and other products. That would mean around $100 billion every year. That is a massive number. It is almost the size of India's annual defense budget. If India had actually made a fixed legal commitment of that scale, it would completely reshape India's import structure. But the official documents do not say that. What India's paperwork says is much more careful. India intends to increase purchases from the United States. That is not the same as saying India is legally bound to buy $500 billion of American goods. It is a direction, not a fixed promise. India gave the American side enough language to claim a political win at home. Trump, Rubio, and J.D. Vance can tell American voters that India is planning to buy more from the United States. But India's trade officials know exactly what the document says. India can still decide how much to buy, when to buy, what to buy, and on what terms. That is not surrender. That is smart negotiation. Trump's aggression should therefore not be read as proof that India is weak. It should be read as proof that India has become too important to ignore. The United States needs this deal too. The European Union has moved forward with India. Australia is deepening trade ties. Japan is investing heavily. Global companies are building supply chains around India. If America waits too long, American businesses risk losing access to one of the most important markets of the next century. That is why Trump is loud, but India is calm, because India knows the leverage it has built. While this political theater was unfolding, India was doing something far more consequential beneath the Andaman Sea. On Independence Day, August 15, 2025, Prime Minister Modi announced the Samudra Manthan mission. The name means the churning of the ocean, drawn from one of the most powerful images in Indian civilization. The idea that great treasures are not found casually, but brought out of the depths through effort, patience, and determination. India is now doing that literally. Oil India Limited has drilled 3 wells in the Andaman Basin. 2 of those 3 have shown natural gas presence. In the difficult and expensive world of deepwater exploration, that is not a small signal. It is the kind of early result that makes geologists, energy companies, and governments pay attention. The geological context makes the discovery even more significant. The rock formation beneath the Andaman Sea belongs to the same broad tectonic province that runs through Indonesia and Myanmar, where similar structures have produced commercially valuable natural gas for years. This does not mean India has already solved its energy problem. A gas discovery is not the same as commercial production. India still needs more drilling, more testing, more investment, pipelines, offshore systems, environmental approvals, and years of development before this gas can reach the mainland. But that is exactly why this matters. Serious countries do not build only for tomorrow morning. They build for the next decade, the next generation, and the next 50 years. India currently imports more than 85% of its oil and a significant portion of its natural gas. Every rupee spent on those imports affects India's trade balance, puts pressure on the rupee, and transfers wealth to foreign energy producers. So when India finds signs of gas in its own sovereign waters, the meaning goes far beyond one well. It changes India's long-term energy psychology. It tells international companies that Indian deep-water blocks deserve serious attention. It tells India's energy planners that the ocean floor may hold answers that were ignored for too long. And it tells the world that India is not waiting for energy security to be delivered by someone else. India is looking for it beneath its own seas. For years, critics have said India may grow fast, but it still depends on the world for the energy that powers that growth. They were right to identify that vulnerability. But India is now attacking that vulnerability from every direction. Russian crude, Gulf partnerships, renewable energy, nuclear power, Chabahar, the International North-South Transport Corridor, and now the Andaman Sea. This is not one policy. It is an energy security architecture. India's energy vulnerability has always been one of the biggest arguments used against India's rise. Critics could always say that India might be growing, but it still depended on the world for the fuel that powered that growth. That is why the Andaman discovery matters for the long term. But India's strength is not only visible in what may happen 10 or 20 years from now. It is already visible in what happened this year. While Trump was attacking India, while tariffs were being used as pressure, while global oil markets were unstable, and while much of the world was slowing down, India answered in the one language every economy understands: growth. India's economy grew at 7.7% in the financial year, 2025 to 26. What makes this number extraordinary is not simply that India grew at 7.7%. It is that India delivered this growth while the world around it was under pressure. The same period saw American tariffs on Indian goods rise sharply. The same year saw the Iran war disrupt global oil markets. Crude prices spiked from around $73 to $126 per barrel. Global uncertainty rose. G7 economies struggled. China slowed down. Europe barely grew. But India kept moving. In the January to March quarter of 2026, when the Iran war was at its most intense and the Strait of Hormuz was under pressure, India grew at 7.8%. India did not need a loud reply. The number told the story. When Trump called India a dead economy, India did not need to answer with anger. India answered with growth. On June 5, 2026, RBI Deputy Governor Poonam Gupta shared another number that tells us something important about India. Global investors are still putting serious long-term money into the country. Gross foreign direct investment into India reached about $95 billion in FY26, a rise of nearly 17% from the previous year. According to the RBI's assessment, this number could cross $100 billion in the current financial year, with some estimates suggesting it may even move toward $110 to $120 billion. This matters because FDI is not the same as stock market money. Portfolio investors can enter and exit within days. They can sell Indian shares because of oil prices, currency movement, valuations, or global market mood. FDI is different. FDI means factories, research centers, supply chains, warehouses, offices, technology hubs, and long-term infrastructure. This is the kind of money that does not come in casually and does not leave overnight. So when nearly $95 billion of gross FDI enters India, it tells us something very clearly. The world is not just watching India grow. The world is betting that India can keep growing even when the world becomes unstable. And that is the real test. Growth looks impressive in peaceful times, but the real strength of an economy is revealed when oil prices rise, wars break out, shipping routes become dangerous, and major powers start using trade as a weapon. That is exactly what happened during the Iran war, and that is where India's preparation becomes important. Everyone knows the Iran war disrupted oil markets, but the real story is what India had already done before the crisis arrived. India had spent 2 decades building Chabahar, a port on Iran's Gulf of Oman coast that sits outside the Strait of Hormuz. So when Hormuz became dangerous, India was not helpless. It already had an alternate access point. India had also diversified its oil basket by buying discounted Russian crude openly and transparently after 2022. That decision reduced India's dependence on Gulf oil and saved billions of dollars when prices were rising. India had also maintained a working relationship with Iran through infrastructure, diplomacy, and patient engagement. It did not build that relationship through hidden deals. It built it through trust developed over years. So when the crisis came, India had 3 things many countries did not have: an alternate route, diversified supply, and diplomatic access. China had built a shadow oil system to hide its dependence. India had built real options to reduce its vulnerability. That is the difference. And this same pattern is visible in defense. India is not only reducing vulnerability in energy, it is reducing vulnerability in security. For decades, India was known as one of the world's biggest arms buyers. Indian defense depended heavily on imports. Indian security depended on foreign suppliers. Indian military modernization often depended on someone else's approval, someone else's production line, and someone else's timeline. That story is now changing. India's Ministry of Defense announced on April 2, 2026, that defense exports for the financial year just concluded reached 38,424 crore rupees, approximately $4 billion. In 12 years, India has gone from being known mainly as a major arms importer to exporting weapons and defense systems to over 100 countries. That is not a small shift. It is a national transformation. The BrahMos missile program began in 1998. It took decades of development, testing, improvement, and investment before it became one of India's most important defense export success stories. For years, the work looked slow, but serious military capability is built slowly. It is tested, improved, corrected, and built again. Then one day, when the world finally sees the system perform, the credibility arrives all at once. That is what happened after Operation Sindoor. Countries watched Indian systems perform against hostile platforms supplied by countries like Turkey and China. They watched Indian air defense systems neutralize drone threats. They watched Indian weapons prove themselves in real conditions. Battle-tested credibility cannot be manufactured. It has to be earned. India earned it. That is why countries like the Philippines, Armenia, Cyprus, Greece, and others are looking at Indian defense systems seriously. They are not buying sentiment. They are buying capability. Recently, Turkey's Foreign Minister, Hakan Fidan, made an unusual public appeal. He asked India not to hold Turkey's Pakistan ties against it and said there is no historical conflict between India and Turkey. That sounds reasonable on the surface. But India remembers the full picture. This is the same Turkey that has repeatedly raised Kashmir at international forums. The same Turkey that has stood with Pakistan diplomatically. The same Turkey that supplied Pakistan with Bayraktar TB2 drones, kamikaze drone systems, and surveillance technology. The same Turkey whose warships were seen in Karachi before Operation Sindoor. So why is Turkey suddenly asking India for good relations? Because India has changed the rules. For years, some countries assumed they could arm Pakistan, give diplomatic cover to Pakistan, internationalize Kashmir, and still enjoy normal relations with India. That assumption is ending. India's new doctrine is simple. If you back India's enemies, there will be a cost. Not always through shouting, not always through direct confrontation, but through strategic response. Turkey backed Pakistan, and India moved closer to Cyprus and Greece. China backed Pakistan, and India supplied BrahMos to the Philippines, while deepening defense conversations with Vietnam and Indonesia. Azerbaijan backed Pakistan, and India became one of Armenia's most important defense partners. This is not random, it is calibrated. India is not attacking these countries. It is changing the strategic environment around them. That is far more sophisticated. When Cyprus President Nikos Christodoulidis visited India in May 2026, India and Cyprus upgraded their relationship to a strategic partnership. They signed a 5-year defense cooperation roadmap covering 2026 to 2031. Cyprus also expressed interest in Indian weapons, including systems proven in Operation Sindoor. For Turkey, this was not a minor development. Cyprus is central to Turkey's eastern Mediterranean ambitions. Northern Cyprus has been under Turkish military occupation since 1974, and Turkey's Blue Homeland Doctrine claims large maritime zones around Cyprus and the Greek islands. Now imagine BrahMos on the coast of Cyprus, a supersonic cruise missile with a range of hundreds of kilometers, placed in a region where Turkey has been trying to assert naval dominance. Turkish media understood the implication immediately. India was not merely selling weapons. India was entering the strategic geography of Turkey's own backyard. Turkey had armed Pakistan. India was now strengthening Turkey's adversaries. That is why Turkey's sudden outreach to India should be understood correctly. It is not generosity, it is calculation. Turkey is beginning to understand that India is no longer a country that absorbs diplomatic hostility and moves on. India remembers. India responds. And India responds where it hurts strategically. While Turkey is asking India for better relations, Pakistan is facing something much deeper. Pakistan is not only under pressure from India. Pakistan is under pressure from itself. The country is facing serious internal conflict in Balochistan, rising TTP violence in the northwest, economic dependence on the IMF, political instability, and a deep crisis of trust between citizens and the state. In Balochistan, the grievance is not abstract. The province contains enormous natural resources, yet remains one of Pakistan's poorest regions. Its people see wealth extracted from their land, while their own communities remain deprived. That anger has fed a growing insurgency. In the northwest, the TTP has turned the Afghan border region into a sustained security nightmare for Pakistan. Pakistan has carried out strikes inside Afghanistan, but those strikes have created more anger against Islamabad. Pakistan is now fighting the consequences of the same policies it once used as strategic tools. For decades, Pakistan cultivated militancy as an instrument against India and Afghanistan. Now that fire is spreading inside its own house. Economically, Pakistan remains trapped. Debt is high. Interest payments consume a huge share of federal revenue. IMF bailouts come with painful conditions. Inflation has hurt ordinary people. Skilled citizens are leaving in large numbers. Politically, Pakistan's most popular leader, Imran Khan, remains in prison. The military continues to dominate the state. Trust in institutions is weak. And above all this sits the most dangerous fact. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state with deep internal instability. This is why India's patience should never be confused with weakness. India is watching Pakistan carefully, not because India wants chaos, but because a collapsing, unstable, nuclear-armed neighbor is a serious security challenge. India has prepared for that too. Pakistan's old strategy depended on what its military thinkers called strategic depth. The idea was that Afghanistan should remain friendly or dependent enough that Pakistan would never have to worry about serious pressure on its western border. That idea is collapsing. Russia and the Taliban government signed a military technical cooperation agreement in Moscow in May 2026. Around the same time, India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval was in Moscow for a major security forum. Nothing has been officially confirmed about India's role, but the outcome matters for India. If Afghanistan receives stronger air defense systems, Pakistan can no longer bomb Afghan territory with the same freedom. That changes the balance. For Pakistan, a stronger Afghanistan is a nightmare. It means Pakistan faces pressure from the east, from India, and from the west, from Afghanistan. It means strategic depth becomes strategic pressure. For India, this serves a clear interest. A more independent Afghanistan weakens Pakistan's ability to dominate the region. It also creates long-term possibilities for connectivity into Central Asia through routes that bypass Pakistan. Once again, India does not need to fire a shot. The strategic map shifts anyway. When you look at all these stories together, one pattern becomes clear. The Andaman gas discovery, the defense export record, the Chabahar advantage, the Russian oil strategy, the Cyprus partnership, the Armenia relationship, the Philippines BrahMos deal, and India's patient handling of Trump's pressure did not happen suddenly. None of them were overnight wins. They were the result of decisions India made years earlier and kept building on patiently. Chabahar was not built after the Strait of Hormuz became dangerous. India had been working on it for years before the world suddenly remembered how vulnerable that waterway is. Russian crude was not bought after India ran out of choices. India diversified its energy basket before Gulf supply became the only option. India's defense industry was not built after the world suddenly started trusting Indian weapons. India spent years pushing domestic manufacturing, testing systems, improving reliability, and building credibility before global demand arrived. The Andaman Sea was not explored after India's import bill became unbearable. India had already started looking beneath its own ocean floor because it understood that a rising country cannot depend forever on energy controlled by someone else. That is the pattern. India looks at a weakness and turns it into a project. It looks at a dependency and builds an alternative. It looks at a future risk and starts preparing before the risk becomes a national emergency. For years, many of these efforts looked slow. Chabahar looked slow. Defense indigenization looked slow. Deep water exploration looked uncertain. Energy diversification looked controversial. But that is how long-term strategy works. It does not always look impressive while it is being built. It looks impressive when the crisis arrives. And that is what happened in 2025 and 2026. The world became unstable. Oil routes became risky. Wars disrupted energy markets. Trump tried to pressure India through trade. Turkey tried to reset with India after backing Pakistan. Pakistan started burning from inside. China began recalculating the cost of using Pakistan against India. Global companies started rethinking China. Countries began asking who they could trust for defense systems, energy partnerships, supply chains, and long-term growth. Suddenly, the work India had been doing quietly for years became visible all at once. Chabahar became an advantage. Russian oil diversification became an advantage. Defense exports became an advantage. The Andaman discovery became an advantage. India's patient diplomacy became an advantage. This is not luck. This is preparation. India did not wait for the world to become difficult. India prepared for a difficult world. And now that the difficult world has arrived, India is not standing empty-handed. It has options, routes, relationships, domestic capacity, and confidence. That is the real story. India's rise is not happening because everything suddenly went right. India's rise is happening because, for years, India kept building even when the results were not immediately visible. And now when the tests are arriving together, the preparation is finally showing its value. There are phrases that have been used about India for decades: a sleeping giant, patient, non-confrontational, willing to absorb pressure, and careful not to escalate. But that description is no longer enough. India has not become reckless. It has not become expansionist. It has not abandoned diplomacy. What India has done is more sophisticated. India has learned to respond to hostile actions with precise, calibrated, strategic consequences. If Turkey backs Pakistan, India strengthens Cyprus and Greece. If China arms Pakistan, India strengthens countries facing China in the South China Sea. If Azerbaijan supports Pakistan, India strengthens Armenia. If the EU allows Pakistan to insert Kashmir into a joint statement, India responds immediately and makes clear that Jammu and Kashmir is India's integral and inalienable part. If Trump tries pressure tactics, India negotiates calmly, protects its flexibility, and keeps building. This is the new India, responsive without being reactive, strategic without being reckless, firm without being loud, and patient without being passive. For years, many countries assumed India would issue statements and move on. That era is ending. India is still willing to work with everyone, but India is no longer willing to absorb everything. Turkey is asking India for good relations. Pakistan is struggling from within. China is recalculating. Trump is pressuring India, but still needs the India deal. This is not coincidence. It is not luck. It is not one headline. It is the result of years of decisions that looked slow when they were being made and powerful when the crisis finally arrived. India built before the crisis. India prepared before the world noticed. India stayed patient before patience became power. And now, when the world is unstable, India is building faster, negotiating harder, exporting weapons, securing routes, attracting capital, strengthening friends, and making it very clear that nobody gets to decide India's limits except India itself. That is the real story. Once again, thank you for watching till here and staying with the story till the end. It genuinely means a lot because videos like this are not made for quick noise. They are made for people who want to understand the deeper pattern behind the headlines. To everyone who watches regularly, comments thoughtfully, shares the videos with others, and gives this work your time, thank you. Your support makes it possible to keep going deeper, connecting the dots, and looking beyond the surface. If this video added something to your understanding, share it with someone who enjoys serious commentary on what is happening in the world. And as always, thank you for being here. The world is changing fast, and we will keep trying to make sense of it together.